Richardson Theater Center proudly presents Theater of the Imagination, a series of music and audio vignettes presented in old-time radio style and featuring the finest of our North Texas community talent. This week, we're featuring part 1 of Daphne de Maurier's classic, haunting romantic thriller, Rebecca. But first, here's a song from a young lady who's becoming quite a regular for RTC, the lovely and super talented Jennifer DeLucy.
In the wee small hours of the morning, while the whole wide world is fast asleep, you lie awake and think about the boy and never ever think of counting sheep. When your lonely heart has learned its lesson, you'd be his if only he would call. In the wee small hours of the morning, that's the time you miss him most. When the sun is high in the afternoon sky, you can always find something to do. But from dusk till dawn, as the clock ticks on, something happens to you. When your lonely heart has learned its lesson, you'd be his if only he would call. In the wee small hours of the morning, that's the time you miss him most of all. That's the time you miss him most of all.
Thanks, Jennifer. Absolutely fabulous as always. And now it's time for this week's vignette, Rebecca, brought to you by AEM Creations. What's your vision? At AEM Creations, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Whether it's a new or better website, custom trademark or logo, animations or graphics, 3D print, or even something as simple as a business card, AEM Creations employs state-of-the-art technology to build custom solutions for your project or business. AEM Creations is a Texas-based company, but our customers span the entire globe, and we work closely with all of our clients to ensure confidentiality and trademark copyright protection. For more information, give us a call at 214-649-0632 or visit our website at www.aem2create.com. That's 214-649-0632 or www.aem2create.com. Call today. Let us make your vision a reality. The lonely British moors, the jagged Cornish coast, the cold and angry sea. All of these images combine to set the backdrop of our story. As a young woman, searching for love, discovers instead a terrible and long-hidden secret. This is Daphne du Maurier's classic mystery, Rebecca.
I can never go back to Manderley again. The past is still too close. The things I've tried to forget and put behind me would stir once more. But sometimes, in my dreams, I go to Manderley again. I see the house, the grey stones shining in the moonlight. The terrace slopes to the lawn, and the lawn stretched to the sea like a sheet of silver under the moon. Light comes from the windows. The curtains blow softly in the night air. And there, in the library, the door stands half open as if I had just left it, with my handkerchief on the table beside the bowl of autumn roses and the charred embers of the log fire still smouldering against the morning. I often wonder if I would ever have even seen it if it hadn't been for that day in the restaurant in Monte Carlo, and Mrs. Van Hopper hadn't been such a conceited American snob.
Manderley? Manderley, my dear? Why, even you must have heard of Manderley, that beautiful house on the Cornish coast.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Van Hop, but I've never been to Cornwall.
Truly? Oh, such a terrible shame. You must learn to travel more, my dear. Even I have been there, and I'm American. A young woman needs to expand her horizons, especially if she wishes to find a suitable husband.
I'm afraid my horizons are quite limited, Mum, as are my prospects for marriage.
Indeed. Well, perhaps that will change in time. After all, you're fetching enough. You need only to work on your decorum and manners.
Yes, Mum. Why do you mention Manderley, Mrs. Van Hopper?
You see that man at the table over there? That's Max de Winter. He owns Manderley. A very wealthy man indeed.
Max de Winter sat by himself at a table near the window, staring out at the sheltered bay with its myriad of yachts and jetties. He looked lonely, forlorn, as if lost in time itself. He looked like no other man I'd ever seen, and something about him seemed quite compelling. He is quite handsome.
Really, my dear, don't even entertain such thoughts. You're hardly the sort of girl for a man of his stature. In any event, I doubt if he'd even be interested. They say he can't get over his wife's death, an appalling tragedy. The papers were full of it, of course. They say he never talks about it, never mentions her name. She was drowned, you know, in the bay near Manderley.
Oh, how terrible.
Indeed. Do me a favor, child. Go up to my room and find that letter from my nephew. Oh, you know, the one written on his honeymoon with the snapshot. Bring it down to me right away.
But why would you need...
Just do as you're told, girl. Don't argue with your elders. Remember, decorum and manners.
Yes, Mum. It took me only a short time to locate the photo she spoke of. When I came back down, I was startled to see none other than Max de Winter sitting beside Mrs. Van Hopper at our table. My face must have betrayed my incredulity, as Mrs. Van Hopper frowned up at me sharply.
Ah, there you are. Is something wrong, child? You look fairly dumbstruck.
No, I mean...
Honestly, girl, you are quite tedious sometimes. This is Mr. Max de Winter. He has graciously accepted my invitation to have coffee with us.
Max de Winter smiled softly, disarmingly, one might say, as he stood up. He bowed, stiffly yet politely, as I handed the picture to Mrs. Van Hopper.
How do you do?
How do you do?
You know, I thought I recognized you, Mr. de Winter. Just as soon as you walked into the restaurant, I thought, why, there's Mr. de Winter, Billy's friend. I simply must show him that picture of Billy and his bride, taken on their honeymoon. Look, you see, here they are sunbathing at Palm Beach. He met her at that party where I first met you at Claridge's in London. Oh, but I dare say you don't remember an old woman like me.
On the contrary, I remember you very well, Mrs. Van Hopper. Excellent snapshot. The bride's quite pretty. However, I don't think I should care to visit Palm Beach. I hear it's quite warm in Florida.
Nonsense. everyone loves America. Of course, if one had a home like Manderley, I could understand not wanting to roam. I'm told Manderley's like a fairyland. There's no other word for it. I wonder how you can ever bear to leave it.
The look on his face suddenly seemed to change, growing even more forlorn, if that was actually possible. In that moment, I felt incredibly sorry for him, although I had no idea why.
It has its moments. I haven't been back for some time.
Of course, too many memories, I'm certain. It must be difficult for you.
If you will excuse me, Mrs. Van Hopper, I'm afraid I have pressing business elsewhere.
But you haven't had your coffee.
Another time, perhaps. Thank you for your understanding.
He smiled at me as he stood up, another of those soft and disarming nods, although I was certain I caught something else behind his sad, dark eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or perhaps just sympathy for my situation.
A pleasure to meet you, my dear.
And you, Mr. De Winter.
Well, did you ever? Why would he act so rudely, do you think?
I'm sure I have no idea, Mum. The next morning, Mrs. Van Hopper woke up with a sore throat and a temperature. I'm ashamed to say I wasn't entirely sorry. At noon, I went down to the restaurant alone. I expected it to be empty. Nobody lunched generally before 1 o'clock. I was surprised to see Max de Winter sitting at the table next to mine. I sat down quietly, trying to keep my eyes averted from his, and managed to knock over the vase of flowers at the table. Mr. De Winter was on his feet almost instantly, hurriedly trying to mop up the water before it could reach me. Sorry, I am so clumsy.
Not at all. Accidents happen. Here now, you can't sit at a wet tablecloth. Waiter, the young lady will dine with me.
Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. I know you're being polite, but...
I'm not being polite. I would genuinely like you to have lunch with me.
You're very kind, Mr. De Winter. Thank you.
You're not dining with Mrs. Van Hopper?
She's not feeling well.
Well, that's too bad. How do you know the good lady, if I might ask?
I'm her personal assistant.
I see. You know, it occurred to me I never caught your name yesterday.
I never gave it.
May I have it?
No.
Excuse me?
Please don't think me rude. It's just that I hate my name.
And why on earth would that be?
Because it's not at all a proper name for a girl. I think the only reason my father bestowed it was because he was disappointed I wasn't a male. Perhaps one day I'll change it.
Or perhaps someone will change it for you.
Perhaps.
My name is Max, by the way. Short for Maximilian. You seem rather young to be a personal assistant.
I'm old enough.
My apologies, I meant no offense. I'm just curious as to how you came to work for someone like Mrs. Van Hopper. With all due respect, she's not exactly...
You can say it. She's an insufferable elitist.
Well, I admire your candor. Why do you work for her?
Because she pays well, and I have very few employable skills.
I like you, even if I don't know your name. How would you like to go for a drive?
I remember the feeling of the leather seats in his Bentley as we drove along the coast road. The Mediterranean was shining brilliantly in the sun. I remember my ill-fitting flannel suit, and how the skirt was lighter than the coat. I remember glancing at my watch and thinking to myself, this moment now, at 20 minutes past 1, the moment must never be lost. Never.
You're very silent, Miss Girl with No Name. What are you thinking?
I was thinking how I wish I were a woman of about 36, dressed in a black satin with a string of pearls.
You wouldn't be in this car with me if you were.
Then why am I here?
Because you're not 36 and dressed in black satin with a string of pearls. Where are you from? I can't quite place your accent.
Leicester originally, then London. After my parents died, I went to live with an aunt.
They died while you were a child?
When I was 7, in a car crash near Coventry.
Oh, I am sorry.
It would seem that we both know tragedy. Mrs. Van Hopper said that your wife was drowned.
Mrs. Van Hopper should mind her own bloody business.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be impertinent.
No, please, forgive my outburst. It's not your fault. It's just that it's something I try not to think about. There are things in life you try to forget, to block out. Do you know what I mean?
I think so.
Memories can be as painful as wounds, I'm afraid, and much slower to heal. Look, do you mind if we go back to the hotel? I'm suddenly not in the mood for conversation any longer.
No, of course not. I'm truly sorry if I offended you, Mr. De Winter. He smiled at me then, gently, with a genuine warmth.
Max, and you didn't offend me, Miss Girl with no name. I'm just not always the best of company. Perhaps we can do this again, before you leave Monte Carlo.
I would like that, Max, very much. We drove back to the hotel in an uncomfortable silence. Every now and then I would sneak a glance in his direction. His face had once more assumed that lost and forlorn look, as if the world had closed upon him. I felt incredibly sorry for him, but I felt something else as well. Something I had never felt before. Something I wanted to feel forever. The next morning, Mrs. Van Hopper was feeling much better, and she blithely announced that she would be leaving that very day for America. I suddenly felt trapped, for lack of a better word, as if I had been chained and was being dragged against my will. I had no real understanding as to why, nor as to why I felt utterly compelled to race upstairs to Max de Winter's room.
Well, hello, if it isn't Miss Girl with no name. To what do I owe the pleasure?
I've come to say goodbye. We're leaving this morning.
Leaving?
Yes. Mrs. Van Hopper has decided she wants to return to America, to New York. I just wanted to say thank you again for your kindness.
New York? And she's taking you with her?
Yes.
No, we simply can't have that.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
I mean exactly what I said. We can't have you going to New York with that obnoxious Biddy. To my mind, that would be a fate worse than death.
I won't completely disagree with you, but I'm afraid I don't really have a choice.
Of course you do. Everyone has a choice.
I have no other prospects, Mr. De Winter. I told you my skills are limited.
My name is Max, and skills have nothing to do with life, young lady. You are capable of achieving anything you desire.
I don't know what I desire.
I do. I desire you.
What? He suddenly stepped closer and pulled me into his arms. His touch was firm, strong, yet exceedingly gentle, and I felt the most incredible sense of security as he held me close.
I said, I desire you. Go and tell Mrs. Van Hopper she can take a flying leap into New York Harbor. You are staying here.
But what will I do?
Well, for one thing, you'll acquire a proper name. After you marry me.
It was thoroughly, and almost perversely, entertaining to see Mrs. Van Hopper's reaction once I told her the news. She was absolutely livid that I would leave her so abruptly, yet visibly godsmacked when she learned why. The look on her face as Max and I stood before her, blissfully embracing, was utterly priceless. For once in her life, I believe the old witch was speechless, and I was in heaven. Max and I stayed in Monte Carlo just long enough to find a judge to perform the ceremony. Then we climbed into his Bentley and sped off through France. The next 2 weeks were a dizzying blur, even when we visited Paris, because I was completely lost in a sea of emotions I had never felt before. Everything was new, fresh, alive. Life itself seemed to have actually started over. I was almost beginning to believe it was a fairy tale, much too good to be true. Then Max announced we were going to Mandalay. We crossed the channel and drove across the English countryside to the Cornish coast. I remember it was cloudy, cold, grey, a typical English autumn day. The ocean seemed almost unwelcoming, as if it knew what was coming and was warning me to stay away. Yet I was blissfully ignorant, uncaring, lost in my newfound happiness with Max. I sat next to him with my head on his shoulder. As we rounded a curve on the narrow road, Max suddenly pointed out the window.
There, look. Mandalay.
There it was. The Mandalay I had expected. Lovelier than I had ever dreamed. Built in its hollow of smooth grassland and mossy lawns, the terraces sloping to the gardens, and the gardens to the sea. It was beautiful, and yet somehow threatening. A servant was standing on the steps as we pulled up to the entrance, an old man with a kind face. A lively Irish setter pranced back and forth around him.
Hello, Frith. Everyone well?
Yes, thank you, sir. Glad to see you home, sir, and madam, too.
Thank you.
This is Frith, my dear. A finer butler you'll never know. He's been with me since, well, how long has it been, old boy?
Oh, I dare say I came with the furniture, sir.
He's hardly joking, I'm afraid. Hello, Jasper, old man. Kept things in line while I was gone, did you? This is Jasper, my dear, the closest thing I have to a genuine confidant. After you, of course.
He's quite beautiful. Oh, everything is beautiful. Max suddenly looked up, and I followed the puzzled frown on his face. A large group of servants was huddled together at the steps outside the door, staring at the two of us with curious and wary expressions. Standing on front of them was a tall, gaunt woman dressed entirely in black, with her hands folded primly in front of her. Her face was almost devoid of any emotion, but her dark, piercing eyes suddenly found mine, and the look they held was nearly as cold as the ocean's breeze.
Frith, what's all this? Why are all the servants here?
Mrs. Danvers' orders, sir.
Ah, yes, Mrs. Danvers. I might have guessed it. Come, darling, it appears we have a welcoming committee. They're all curious to see what you're like. You won't mind, will you?
No, of course not.
My dear, allow me to introduce Mrs. Danvers. She is the mistress of Mandalay.
Those cold eyes held mine tightly. She nodded, ever so formally, and what might have passed for a smile pulled across her tight lips for only a fraction of a second.
Madam, a pleasure to meet you. Mr. De Winter telegraphed that you were coming. I wanted to make sure that you were greeted properly. You are now the mistress of Mandalay, by the way. I shall endeavour to assist as best I can.
You're very kind, Mrs. Danvers.
Not at all.
Mrs. Danvers, would you please be so kind as to show Mrs. De Winter the interior of the house? I need to speak with Frith. You'll be all right, darling?
Another cold chill suddenly shook me as I looked at Mrs. Danvers, yet I shrugged it off as being just the weather. Of course, dearest. I'm sure I'm in excellent hands. The interior of Mandalay was every bit as stunning as the outside. Lush tapestries hung from vaulted ceilings, along with crystal chandeliers, and long-dead ancestors glared down at me from gilt-edged portraits. Mrs. Danvers caught my stunned expression and very nearly smiled.
Mandalay is a big place, madam. Not so big as some, of course, but big enough. And a showplace. Mr. De Winter lets the public in to see it once a month.
I can see why. I can't even begin to describe it.
Indeed. This way, madam.
Mrs. Danvers led me up a long, winding staircase, past even more pretentious paintings to a dark corridor that seemed to go on forever. She stopped partway along the hall.
This is your room, madam.
Oh, it's lovely. But you can't see the sea from this window, can you?
No, you can't even hear it. You'd not know the sea was anywhere near, not from this side of the house. You're disappointed?
Ever so slightly, I suppose. I do so like the sea.
The house is much warmer on this side. Something you'll appreciate at night. In any event, Mr. De Winter gave special orders in his letter that you would have this room.
Oh, then this was not his room originally.
Oh, no, madam. He's never used these rooms before. He's opened them just for you.
I see. I suppose you've been at Manderley for many years, Mrs. Danvers.
I came here when the first Mrs. De Winter was a bride.
Her name was Rebecca? The first Mrs. De Winter? Once again, the look in her eyes brought a sudden chill, despite the fact the room was comfortably warm.
You must know this, madam. Here at Manderley, we don't mention her name, ever. The master expressly forbids it. I was remiss in saying it myself.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Danvers. Mrs. Danvers, you must have patience with me. This sort of life is new to me. Please, go on running things as you always have. I don't want to make any changes.
I am here to carry out your orders, madam. I hope I shall do everything to your satisfaction. Can I do anything more for you now?
Oh, no, thank you. I'm sure I'll be very comfortable here. You've made the room quite charming. She nodded and turned to leave. Something compelled me to ask one final question. Mrs. Danvers, was she beautiful? The first Mrs. De Winter?
She was the most beautiful creature I have ever seen.
Once again the room turned cold, even though the window was closed and it wasn't facing the sea. Next morning there was a heavy mist. The Cornish countryside, already stark and barren, was made even more bleak by the swirling fog outside my window. When I came down to breakfast, the table was set for only one. Frith was in the room pouring coffee into an exquisite china cup.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning. Mr. Frith, is it?
Oh, just Frith, ma'am. Mr. is for the gentry, not the likes of me.
I hardly consider myself gentry. I was only recently a servant myself. Where is Mr. De Winter? Will he be joining me?
Oh, no, ma'am. The master had business to attend. He left a short time ago to see Mr. Crawley.
Mr. Crawley?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Mr. Crawley is Mr. De Winter's solicitor. He manages the estate. Mr. De Winter said to tell you he'd be back for luncheon at 1.
I see. Do you think it might be possible for me to take a walk near the beach this morning?
Oh, madam hardly needs my approval to do as she pleases. Although I would suggest you take Jasper along. He knows the trails quite well, especially in this fog.
Thank you. I appreciate your advice.
Oh, not at all, madam. And may I say, our new mistress is quite kind. Not at all like—
Yes? Not at all like—
Oh, nothing, madam. Nothing at all. Enjoy your day, and please be careful during your walk.
He left the room quite quickly, and I had the sense of impropriety, embarrassment even, though I had no idea why. It was the same feeling I had had the evening before with Mrs. Danvers, that odd chill that seemingly swirled around the memory of the first Mrs. De Winter. Rebecca. After breakfast, I slipped into a grey mac and then left the house through the side door that faced the sea. Jasper suddenly appeared out of the fog and ran to me, unsolicited, almost as if he knew who I was and why he was needed. He ran just ahead of me along the narrow path that led to the garden towards the cliffs. I could hear the sea, but the fog was still too thick, and Jasper stayed just far enough ahead of me to safely guide. He turned and trotted happily down a winding rocky trail, and then suddenly we were on the beach. Long, tempestuous waves crashed almost angrily into the sand before swirling back into the icy grey Atlantic. Oh, it was beautiful, but still somehow frightening. There was a boy anchored there in the small cove, but no boat. And there was a boathouse, small, dilapidated. It looked as if it hadn't been used in years. Jasper ran towards it hurriedly, as if there was someone he knew waiting inside. I followed out of curiosity. It was dark inside, and cold, seemingly even colder than the day itself. I could barely make out the interior, which smelled rather rankly of rotting fish and wet canvas. There were the usual collection of nautical accoutrement, fishing nets, oars, and the like. An old longboat lay upside down on the sandy floor, looking far too bashed and battered to even sail again. And oddly enough, there was a cot in a far corner of the room. I wouldn't have thought more of it had it not been for the coverings. The sheets, while covered now in sand and filth, were made of silk, and they had obviously once been quite beautiful, with a floral pattern that suggested a woman's touch. Why, I thought, would anyone bring such exquisite bed-clothing to a filthy shack? Oh! I turned suddenly at Jasper's urgent bark and nearly leapt from my skin when I saw the figure in the doorway. The grey light behind him hid his features, but I could easily see the shabby clothes and tousled hair. I took a step backwards, reaching frantically for Jasper's collar, but the creature suddenly rushed forward and fairly jumped quite eagerly into the man's outstretched arms.
Jasper, old boy, come give old Ben a nice lick, have we?
Despite his familiarity with the dog, I still found myself searching for some sort of weapon. My scrambling hand rushed across the gaff hook hanging on the wall, and I seized it eagerly, and then shook the rusted metal at him. Who are you?
Just Ben. That's all, just Ben.
What are you doing here? Answer me, or I'll summon the law.
The law? Oh, no need for the law. Ben didn't do nothing, miss. Ben didn't do nothing. I didn't see nothing either. Just like I told the other one.
The other one?
The other missus, who used to come here a lot, she did. Didn't like me, she didn't. Always yelling at old Ben. Said if I ever told anyone about her, she'd have me put away. In an asylum, she said. Oh, you won't put me in an asylum, will you, missus?
I don't understand. The other missus? Do you mean the other Miss De Winter?
Not like her, you're not. Oh, I can tell. You have kind eyes. She had mean eyes, like a snake. And she's gone now, ain't she?
Gone? You mean dead? Yes, I believe she is.
She's gone into the sea. Won't ever come back no more. Won't ever yell at old Ben again. Oh, I'm glad for that.
Why did she tell you not to say anything? What did you see?
Well, I didn't see nothing. Nothing. Don't put old Ben away. Don't put me in an asylum.
He turned and ran in a fair panic, with Jasper racing happily after him. I was relieved, of course, but at the same time I was puzzled, confused. What was he talking about?
She had mean eyes, like a snake. She's gone into the sea. I'm glad for that.
Once again the cold swept through me, as if someone had walked across my grave.
What were you doing in the boathouse?
Max was livid. He had returned to Manderley a little before 1, and I immediately went to see him in his study. I wanted to tell him about my strange encounter, and I thought he would be sympathetic to my concerns, but instead he grew angry, so much so that he fairly shook with fury. For the first time since we'd met, I was actually frightened of him. I told you I took a walk along the beach and Jasper ran inside. I was merely trying to fetch him.
Why were you even on the beach to begin with? The coach is dangerous, especially in bad weather.
But I took precautions, Max. That's why Jasper was with me.
You should have asked me first.
Well, you weren't here. Besides, I don't understand. If I am mistress of Manderley, as you insist, am I not allowed to explore for myself? To visit my own property?
No! Yes, you are. You are indeed. I'm sorry, darling. Please forgive my outburst. It's just that...
Just that what?
Nothing. I'm glad you had Jasper with you.
So am I, especially when that strange man appeared.
You mean Ben?
Who is he?
No one, really. He's a beachcomber. He lives nearby. He's harmless, just not right in the head.
So I assumed. He kept saying someone had threatened to put him in an asylum.
Who?
I don't know. He was very cryptic. But from what I had gathered, I believe he was talking about your late wife. Max's eyes suddenly flared, and a look of what I can only describe as near terror swept across his face. For a brief moment I thought he might erupt again, but then slowly he seemed to calm.
What else did he say?
Nothing that made sense, only that he hadn't seen or told anyone anything. He also said that I had kind eyes, not like the other one. What did he mean by that?
I have absolutely no idea. I told you he's not right in the head. Darling, I'm truly sorry you were frightened, but I want you to promise me you won't go near the boathouse ever again. Please.
If you say so. It's not a very pleasant place anyway.
No, it's not. As I said, the cove is dangerous. That's where she died.
You mean?
My first wife, Rebecca.
It was the first time I had ever heard him mention her name, and it seemed to be almost poisonous on his lips. That strange, sad, forlorn look came sweeping back to his face. Instantly my fear melted into sorrow, and I rushed into his arms. Oh, Max, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me for causing you pain.
You can never cause me pain, dearest. Never. No, if anyone is at fault, it's me. I think perhaps we should have stayed in France. Coming back to Manderley may not have been a wise decision.
Join us again next time for the chilling conclusion of Rebecca, another terrific installment of RTC's Theater of the Imagination. Be sure to visit our Facebook and YouTube pages for previous episodes, and feel free to comment and especially like in support. And please consider donating on our webpage, www.richardsontheatrecenter, spelled TheatreCentre.net. Help us keep community theater thriving.